the stars were dying, not in the gentle fading of ancient light, but in a violent extinguishing, one by one, like candles snuffed by an unseen hand. Across the endless void, the final embers of distant suns flickered and faded beneath a suffocating shroud that stretched from the eye of terror itself. The galaxy held its breath, as if the very fabric of existence quivered in the face of something ancient, inexorable, and cruel. Below this gathering darkness stood Cadia, the fortress world, the bulwark of the Imperium's final defense against the ever-encroaching warp. Its jagged mountains and endless fortifications carved into stone like a hymn of iron and fire. For millennia, its guns had roared, and its soldiers had died to hold the line. The Cadian Gate, the only barrier between the known galaxy and the nightmare beyond. But now, the skies burned red with omen. The heavens themselves seemed to weep molten tears, streaks of warp lightning tearing across the firmament like veins unraveling from a dying heart. In the great halls of Casamirak, the seat of command, Lord Castellan Garin Vaughan stood silent, staring through the massive viewport where stars once danced. He was a man forged in endless war, his face etched with the weight of centuries. Eyes like cold steel, but beneath them a flicker of something older, doubt. The fortress around him was unyielding, but his soul trembled. For Garin Vaughan knew what the ancient prophecies whispered, what the worn tomes dared to hint only in shadows. This night would not end with victory. Cadia would burn, and perhaps so too would he. Before we begin the story, know this. We truly love and care for you, the listener. This tale is for those who walk with courage through darkness, for those who bear the weight of hope when all seems lost. So tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. A slow pulse vibrated beneath the ground. The ancient seismic monitors beneath Casamirak hummed faintly, as if sensing the heartbeat of the world itself faltering. Garin's fingers curled tightly around the rail as his thoughts drifted back to the last time the stars dimmed like this, millennia ago, when Cadia had faced an earlier darkness and barely survived. He remembered the faces of fallen comrades, the endless parade of funerals, the crushing weight of duty that chained him still. To be immortal was a curse as much as a blessing. Garin had lived through centuries of war, watching empires rise and crumble like dust beneath his boots. Each victory was a wound, each triumph a reminder that no light lasts forever. The first message came moments later, a crackling voice over the vox, trembling with urgency. Lord Castellan, the warp storms grow stronger. Sensors report fluctuations near the Cadian Gate. Fleet commanders advise heightened alert. Vaughan nodded, the familiar command settling like iron in his chest. Prepare, the regiments. Let the Emperor's light shine through this darkness, no matter the cost. But inside, a quiet voice whispered that the cost would be more than any could bear. Outside, the soldiers moved with grim purpose. Steel armor clanked against stone as ranks formed, banners snapping in the cold wind. They did not yet know if this night would be their last, but they fought because surrender was a word never spoken on Cadia. As Garin turned away from the viewport, the stars flickered once more. Somewhere deep within the eye, something ancient stirred. Hungry, patient, and eternal. The journey of Cadia's last stand had begun. He halls beneath Casamirak thrummed with whispered unease, voices low and cautious, like the rustling of dead leaves. Captain Cerelia's footsteps echoed sharply against the cold stone. her armor gleaming dimly under flickering lights. She moved swiftly toward the Lord Castellan's chambers, bearing news that would fracture even the strongest resolve. She found Garen Vaughan standing before a holographic star map, the pale blue light casting harsh shadows on his weathered face. His eyes, usually sharp with command, now carried the weight of sleepless nights and endless war. "Captain," he said without turning, voice rough. "Report." Her breath caught as she swallowed the dread she felt clawing at her throat. Strange murmurs have spread through the ranks. Soldiers speak of the Emperor's light dimming, of abandoned hope. There are incidents, shadows in the corridors, weapons failing without cause, men hearing voices that are not their own. Vaughan's gaze sharpened. The warp has always seeped close to Cadia's bones, but this is different. Worse. The regiments on the northern ridge reported entire squads disappearing without a trace during their patrols. Some claim it is the work of demon entities slipping through the veil. Others speak of betrayal from within. The word hung heavy in the air. Vaughan turned from the star map, fixing Sorelia with a steady gaze. "Have you seen these shadows yourself?" She nodded, voice firm despite the tremor beneath. "I have. Twice, in the armory, and again near the supply tunnels. No living creature was found, only cold footprints fading into nothing." He closed his eyes briefly. "The warp's touch is growing. We must be vigilant, but not allow fear to unravel our discipline." Before she could reply, the chamber's ancient vox crackled to life. A grating voice interrupted their solemn moment. A tech priest from the depths below. "My Lord Castellan, the excavation in Vault 47 is complete. We request your presence to witness the findings." Vaughan's lips pressed thin. "Very well. Captain, accompany me. This may hold the key to our survival, or our doom." The corridors leading to the vault were a stark contrast to the grandeur above. Here the air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, and the walls bore the scars of forgotten wars. The tech priests moved with mechanical precision, their ceramite plates clinking softly, eyes glowing with unnatural light. At the vault's entrance, ancient runes pulsed faintly, an eerie green glow leaking from the seams. The doors groaned open, revealing a chamber carved from black stone. At its center, resting an artifact, a shard of translucent crystal, swirling with chaotic energies beyond comprehension. One of the tech priests stepped forward, voice a harsh monotone. "This shard resonates with the immaterium itself. It is a fragment of the Void Heart, a relic believed lost since the dark age of technology. Its power could sever the veil between real space and the warp, granting us control over the tides of chaos." Sorelia's eyes narrowed. "Or it could rip us apart." Vaughan approached cautiously, feeling the artifact's whisper curl around his mind, seductive and dangerous. To wield such power would be to flirt with damnation, yet to stand against the coming storm without it seemed a certain death. "Has the Inquisition been informed?" Vaughan asked. The tech priest nodded, and moments later, an Inquisitor arrived, a figure shrouded in shadows and secrets. His gaze pierced Vaughan, calculating. "This shard," the Inquisitor said, voice smooth but cold, "could turn the tide of this war, but it demands a price. To use it is to bind ourselves to forces that even the Emperor fears." Vaughan's jaw clenched. The lines between salvation and ruin blurred. He had sworn to protect Cadia, but at what cost? The corridor outside whispered with tension, soldiers passing with uncertain steps. Somewhere far beyond, the first tendrils of the Black Legion's fleet had breached the outer system. Time was bleeding away. Captain Sorelia placed a steady hand on Garen's arm. The men are faltering. The shadows eat at their minds. If we cannot trust ourselves, how can we trust this shard? He looked out toward the stars again, the distant flicker of destruction growing closer. In this war, Vaughn said quietly, there are no innocents, only choices and consequences. The battle for Cadia's soul had begun. The War Council chamber of Casa Mirak was a cavernous space, scarred by centuries of battle and echoing with the weight of history. Massive stone pillars rose like sentinels, their surfaces carved with the names of heroes long dead. Around the circular table, the remaining generals and commanders gathered, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion and grim determination. At the head stood Lord Castellan Garen Vaughan, his figure commanding yet weary. His voice, when he spoke, carried the iron resolve of a man who had seen countless wars but bore the fresh pain of this one's coming. The Cadian gate will hold, he declared. Cadia will not fall as long as even one Cadian draws breath. We owe it to the Emperor, to the millions who rely on us. Retreat is defeat, and defeat is the death of hope. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some nodded with solemn agreement. Others exchanged uneasy glances. General Carvos, commander of the 88th Steel Legion, stepped forward, his voice low but firm. My lord, with respect, the enemy's forces far outnumber us. Our fleets falter, and the outer defences crumble. A strategic withdrawal could save a portion of our forces to fight another day. Vaughan's eyes burned. Cadia is no mere planet to abandon. It is the heart of the Imperium's defense. If we yield, the warp will spill unchecked across the sector. The price of survival is more than a line on a tactical map. The tension thickened. Captain Sorelia, standing just behind Vaughan, met the gaze of her fellow officers, her face shadowed but resolute. Later, in private, she approached Vaughan in the dim corridors, her voice barely above a whisper. Lord Castellan, there are those who question your resolve. The men fear the growing darkness, and some, Vaughan prompted, the edge sharp in his tone. Some speak of turning to the shard found beneath Casa Mirak. They see it as salvation, though the Inquisitor warns of its dangers. They are willing to risk everything to wield it. Vaughan's jaw tightened. A relic from an age lost to legend. Power that could corrupt or consume. I fear what it will ask of us. Yet without it, we stand little chance. He studied her face, reading the conflict in her eyes. Duty clashing with fear, hope entwined with despair. We are bound by oaths older than the stars, yet bound too by survival. I must decide which bond is stronger. That night, as Cadia's moons cast pale light over the shattered spires, Vaughan walked alone to the battlements. The air was thick with anticipation, and the distant rumble of approaching fleets echoed like the drums of fate. Memories stirred, of comrades lost, of battles won and lost, of a life stretched thin across centuries. To be immortal was to witness the endless cycle of ruin and rebirth, the slow decay of everything held dear. He whispered to the void, "If I must fall with this world, let it be on my terms." Behind him, shadows lengthened and flickered, the unseen eyes of enemies and traitors alike watching, waiting. The choice was his, and it would shape not only Cadia's fate, but the fate of the galaxy. He void above Cadia churned with an unholy fury. The Black Legion's fleet, a maelstrom of corruption and malice, had breached the outer perimeter of the Cadian system. Their warships blotted out the stars, enormous behemoths that pulsed with chaotic energy and prowled the darkness like ancient predators awakened from a long slumber. From the bridge of the Casa Vaughan, the flagship of the Cadian fleet, Lord Castellan Garin Vaughan stood silently, eyes fixed on the shifting holographic displays that flickered with incoming threats. Around him, officers barked orders, voices tense but resolute. Enemy vessels are approaching Vector Delta 7. A tactical officer announced. They outnumber us 3-1, my lord. Vaughan's expression remained stoic, though a storm raged beneath his calm surface. Hold the line. Focus fire on the leading ships. We will not break. The bridge trembled as the first salvo of plasma and macro cannon fire erupted into the void. Explosions blossomed like deadly stars, lighting the darkness with violent beauty. Cadian gunners fought with relentless precision, each shot a prayer to the Emperor. But the enemy was vast. Ships bearing the sigils of Abaddon's Black Legion twisted through the void, their hulls scarring reality itself as the warp energies they harnessed warped space around them. Among the attackers sailed the Oblivion's Maw, a dread battleship said to be haunted by the souls of thousands of fallen Astartes. As the battle raged, Vaughan's eyes narrowed. Something was amiss. The enemy's targeting was unnervingly precise, striking weak points before they were exposed, anticipating maneuvers as though they had inside knowledge. A cold suspicion crept into his mind. There was a traitor within the fortress, feeding information to the invaders. He clenched his fists. Seal all comm channels. Double the patrols in the inner casas. I want eyes everywhere. Meanwhile, on the war-torn surface below, Captain Sorelia led a squadron of stormtroopers against a sudden drop-pod assault. The sky above was rent with streaks of fire as the first Chaos Space Marines breached the outer defenses. Sorelia's voice crackled over the Vox. Hold positions. Do not let them through. For Cadia. The ground shook as titanic footsteps echoed in the distance. The arrival of the Chaos Titans, monstrous war machines casting vast shadows over the battlefield. Back aboard the Casa Vaughan, an encrypted message flashed across the command console. Vaughan's fingers hesitated before decrypting it. The data was clear and damning. Coordinates of weak points within Cadia's defenses, detailed schedules of troop movements, information only someone on the inside could have provided. His heart tightened with bitter resolve. Find the traitor, bring them to me. As the battle for the heavens intensified, the fate of Cadia hung in the balance. A fragile thread stretched taut between hope and annihilation. The stars themselves seemed to watch, silent witnesses to the last stand of a world that refused to die quietly. The shattered ruins of Casa Vilis bore silent witness to the fury unleashed that day. Where once proud towers pierced the crimson sky, now only jagged spires and smoking craters remained. The ground was scarred with scorch marks and the remnants of countless fallen warriors, both imperial and heretic. Captain Sorelia moved through the devastation with purposeful steps, her bolt pistol heavy in her hand. Around her, survivors of the shattered regiments regrouped, their faces a grim tapestry of exhaustion, pain, and lingering fear. The initial chaos assault had been swift, brutal, and precise, more than mere luck could explain. Her Vox crackled with static as she relayed updates back to Casa Myrak. Command, the enemy has breached outer defenses at multiple points. We are engaging Chaos Astartes and demonic entities. Casualties are heavy. A sudden shout broke through the noise. One of her scouts stumbled forward, pale and shaking. Captain, we found tracks, concealed passages through the old tunnels. Someone has been guiding the enemy through secret routes. Sorelia's eyes narrowed. A traitor in our midst. Her mind raced back to the encrypted message, intercepted aboard the Casa Vaughan. If the enemy had allies within Cadia's walls, the fight was no longer just against the Black Legion. It was a war of shadows and lies. Later, in the dim recesses of a command outpost, Sorelia convened with Vaughn and a small council of trusted officers. The atmosphere was thick with tension and whispered suspicion. "We must root out the betrayer," Sorelia urged. "Who among us could have such treachery in their heart?" Vaughn's gaze was hard, haunted. Trust is a weapon, and betrayal a poison. But if we cannot trust ourselves, Cadia falls from within before the enemy's blade even touches us. A quiet murmur spread. The once unshakable bond between officers now frayed by doubt. As the council debated, a sudden alarm blared. The fortress-wide vox erupted with urgent commands. A patrol led by one of the senior officers, Captain Marek, had vanished while investigating the eastern tunnels. Vaughn's jaw clenched. "Send reinforcements. Find Marek and bring him back, dead or alive." Days turned to nights without rest, each moment bringing fresh horrors. The whispers of betrayal grew louder among the ranks. Shadows lengthened not just in the corridors but in hearts. Then, in the dead of night, Sorelia disappeared. Her last transmission was fractured, speaking of a secret meeting with an unknown ally promising answers. But no trace of her remained. Vaughn stared at the empty room she once occupied, the weight of loss pressing down like the crushing void. The war outside raged on, but inside Casa Mirak, a darker battle unfolded, one of trust broken and alliances shattered. The question that echoed through the fortress was one that no man dared answer aloud. When the enemy comes not only with fire and steel, but with poison in their veins, how do you know who stands beside you? Deep beneath the shattered spires of Casa Mirak, in chambers forgotten by time and light, the tech priests labored with unyielding purpose. Their augmetic limbs clinked against cold metal as they toiled, their voices a chant of mechanized devotion. The air was thick with ozone and the scent of burning ceramite. The vault that had once been sealed for millennia was now open, its secrets unveiled before wary eyes. At the center rested the shard, an alien crystal pulsating with sickly green light that seemed to warp the very space around it. It whispered in a tongue older than any living thing, promises of power and salvation twisted with threats and doom. The tech priests had worked tirelessly to stabilize its chaotic energies, but with each attempt, the shard's resonance grew stronger, more insistent. It reached into their minds, tugging at reason with tendrils of madness. In the shadowed doorway, the Inquisitor appeared, his dark robes billowing like a storm's breath. His gaze was cold, assessing the artifact with the calculating eye of one who had traded sanity for knowledge. "My Lord Castellan," the Inquisitor intoned, stepping forward. "This relic is the key. The Void Heart fragment contains the potential to rend the fabric between real space and the warp itself. Harnessed correctly, it could annihilate the Black Legion's fleet before they reached the heart of Cadia." Vaughn's eyes narrowed, muscles taut. "At what cost?" "The warp is a cancer. To invite it in even further is to doom us all." The Inquisitor's smile was a blade cloaked in silk. "Sacrifices must be made. Better to wield the shard's power and risk damnation than to fall under the tide of chaos." Captain Sorelia, having returned under mysterious circumstances yet bearing the mark of the warp, stood silently by Vaughn's side. Her eyes flickered with unease as she regarded the shard. "I have seen what the warp can do," she said quietly. "This thing, it is not salvation. It is a curse. It will consume us if we are not careful." The chamber fell into heavy silence. broken only by the shard's faint pulse, a heartbeat from a dying god. Outside, the battle drums of Cadia grew louder. The distant thunder of engines and the howl of approaching warp storms pressed on the fortress world. Time was bleeding away. Vaughn faced the impossible choice: to reject the shard and face overwhelming annihilation, or to accept its tainted gift and risk becoming the architects of their own destruction. "Prepare the defenses," he said at last, voice grim but steady. "We fight not only with weapons but with will, but keep the shard secure. We do not yet know who we might lose to its call." The Inquisitor inclined his head, a shadow passing through his eyes. "May the Emperor guide our hands in these dark days." As they turned from the chamber, the shard's whispers grew louder still, echoing promises that no mortal soul should hear, promises of power, immortality, and oblivion. The war for Cadia's future had crossed into a new and darker realm. The skies above Cadia darkened beyond mere storm. The eye of terror pulsed ominously, its churning chaos tearing at the boundaries of reality itself. Lightning crackled across the heavens, fracturing the once steady stars like shards of broken glass. From the ramparts of Casimirak, Garen Vaughn watched as tendrils of warp energy twisted and writhed, unraveling the fabric of the universe. The heavens wept strange. Fire, sickly green and violet flares that bathed the fortress world in an eerie, unnatural glow. "Look," whispered Captain Sorelia at his side, her voice edged with fear. "The sky itself is breaking." Beneath the storm, the first demonic tendrils spilled through rifts torn by the Black Legion's relentless assault. The air was thick with the scent of brimstone and decay. From shattered bastions, demonic hordes poured forth like a tide of nightmares made flesh, writhing limbs, burning eyes, and claws that tore at stone and spirit alike. The outer casas trembled under the weight of unholy war machines. Chaos titans, gargantuan constructs of corrupted metal and warp energy, stomped forward, their steps shaking the earth like thunder. Their banners, torn and stained, fluttered in the unnatural winds. The battle was no longer just of steel and gunpowder, but of reality itself unraveling. Inside the fortress, the people of Cadia, soldiers and civilians alike, stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces pale but resolute. The walls that had withstood 1,000 sieges groaned under the pressure. Cracks snaked through stone like veins, and the ground beneath their feet shifted, a cruel reminder that even the land itself was betraying them. Vaughn's voice rang out, steady despite the chaos. "Hold the line. We fight for every inch, every breath. Let the Emperor's light be our shield." Yet even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. The shard from the vault pulsed in his mind, a dark siren calling to powers he barely understood. The boundaries between the physical and the immaterial blurred with each passing hour. Whispers spread among the ranks, of curses, of lost souls, of death creeping not just from enemies, but from within. Some soldiers refused to bear arms, haunted by visions of endless despair. Sorelia sought Vaughn in the command hall, her eyes haunted. This is no longer a battle for survival. It is a war against time, against reality itself. If the rifts grow, Cadia will be swallowed whole. Vaughn nodded, feeling the crushing weight of inevitability. Then we must burn brighter, if only for a moment, before the darkness consumes us all. Outside, the storm raged on. Lightning cleaved the sky, and the stars seemed to weep their final tears. The eye of terror had opened wider, and Cadia's last stand had truly begun. The corridors of Casimirak grew colder with each passing hour, as if the very stones themselves mourned the fate of the world above. Whispers floated on the stale air. Fragments of fear and doubt that clung like shadows to the minds of those who walked these ancient halls. Captain Sorelia moved through the fortress with a heavy heart, her steps measured and deliberate. The disappearance of her squad, the betrayal unearthed, and the ever-growing shadow of the Shard weighed on her spirit. Yet she fought to maintain the fragile thread of hope. In the dim glow of the command chamber, Garen Vaughn stood before the tactical display, tracing the enemy's advance with a furrowed brow. The Black Legion's forces pressed closer, their every move a calculated strike, their strength fueled by the rising warp storms. Beside him, the Inquisitor watched silently, his eyes reflecting a cold calculus. "The Shard's power grows stronger," he murmured. "It is awakening ancient forces, ones even we barely comprehend." Vaughn's voice was a low growl. "And at what price? We risk becoming the very monsters we fight." Suddenly, the chamber's alarms blared. Sensors detected a rupture within the fortress itself, a breach in the eastern defenses where Sorelia's last patrol had vanished. "Deploy squads immediately," Vaughn commanded, his voice steel. "We cannot allow them to tear through our walls from within." As soldiers rushed to seal the breach, Sorelia led a small strike team into the labyrinthine tunnels below. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and decay, and faint whispers echoed from the darkness. Taunts from the warp, or perhaps the cries of lost souls. The deeper they ventured, the more the world seemed to warp and twist. Reality bent in unnatural ways, corridors stretched endlessly, and shadows flickered with ghostly shapes. Suddenly, they came upon a chamber bathed in greenish light, the Shard's influence evident in the pulsating energy that warped the very walls. And there, in the center, stood a figure cloaked in shadow, a traitor revealed. Sorelia's heart thundered as the man turned. It was Captain Marek, eyes glazed and voice void of reason. "The Shard speaks," he whispered, "and it promises salvation through destruction." Before she could react, Marek raised a corrupted blade, its edges shimmering with warp energy. The battle was swift and brutal. Sorelia's squad fought desperately, each strike against Marek and his warp-tainted soldiers a fight for their very souls. When the dust settled, only silence remained, heavy and suffocating. Back in Casa Mirak, Vaughn received the report, his expression grim but resolute. The traitor was found, but the cost had been high. "This war is not just fought with bolters and blades," he said quietly. "It is a battle for our minds, our spirits, and our very souls." Outside, the storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving. Cadia's last stand was a war within and without, a crucible that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. The once impenetrable bastion of Cadia was now a labyrinth of chaos and despair. The fortress world's proud spires lay shattered. Great fissures cracked the surface, and fires raged unchecked in the distance. Above, the blood-red sky churned with unnatural storms, while the warp's cold breath seeped into every corner of the beleaguered planet. Within the command sanctum of Casa Mirak, Garen Vaughn stood at the heart of the storm, his features gaunt but resolute. The Shard's influence pulsed faintly within the chamber, a reminder of the terrible power he had reluctantly sanctioned. Around him, officers and tech priests hurried to prepare defenses, their faces masks of grim determination. Yet beneath the surface, the strain of unending conflict and creeping madness gnawed at the minds of those who remained. Vaughn's own thoughts were a battleground of duty and doubt. The Shard promised salvation, but at a price that haunted every waking moment. A messenger arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. "My lord, The Black Legion's advance has breached the lower casas. The outer defenses falter. The enemy grows bolder, using the warp storms to cloak their movements. Vaughn's voice was steel. Then we must be stronger still. Every man, every weapon, hold the line. Meanwhile, Captain Cerelia paced the dim corridors, the memories of the traitor's betrayal a fresh wound. She knew that trust was fragile here, and the shard's corrupting whisper was a poison that threatened to unravel them all. As the night deepened, an uneasy quiet fell over the fortress, a fragile pause before the next storm. Vaughn retreated to a private chamber, seeking a moment of solitude. He removed his helmet, revealing eyes rimmed with exhaustion and sorrow. He thought of the billions depending on Cadia's survival, of the Emperor's distant gaze that none could meet, and of the endless cycle of war and loss he was caught within. A soft voice called from the shadows. It was Cerelia, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of all that was at stake. "We fight not just for survival," she said, voice steady yet heavy, "but for the memory of what we once were. The line must hold, no matter the cost." Vaughn nodded slowly, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a shroud. Outside, the warp storms twisted and writhed, as if the galaxy itself mourned what was to come. The final battle loomed on the horizon, a clash not just of armies, but of fate itself. And in that shadow, the fragile hope of Cadia flickered like a dying star. The howl of the warp storms outside was a ceaseless cacophony, a symphony of destruction and despair that battered the ancient walls of Casa Mirak. Within the fortress, every breath was a struggle against the suffocating weight of inevitability. Lord Castellan Garin Vaughn stood atop the highest battlement, the biting wind tugging at his worn cloak. His eyes, rimmed with fatigue and shadowed by years of unyielding war, scanned the horizon where the infernal glow of enemy fires marked the advance of the Black Legion's forces. Beside him, Captain Cerelia remained silent, her gaze fixed on the swirling tempest that encroached like a ravenous beast. The shard's malevolent presence lingered in their minds, a constant reminder of the perilous choice they had made. "Do you think we can hold them, my lord?" she asked, voice barely audible over the storm. Vaughn's reply was slow, measured. "Cadia has never been a place where hope blooms freely. We hold because we must, because to surrender would mean oblivion. But hope is a fragile thing." As the enemy's assault reached a fevered pitch, the fortress shuddered under waves of fire and demonic fury. Titans clashed in thunderous combat, their colossal forms silhouetted against the burning sky. The ground trembled as war machines marched in unending columns, crushing all resistance beneath their feet. Inside the command chamber, Vaughn convened his last war council. The faces around him were drawn, marked by exhaustion and loss, but their eyes burned with stubborn defiance. "We stand at the edge of annihilation," Vaughn said, voice heavy with sorrow. "But this is our duty, to hold the line until the last breath. The Emperor's light shines in us all, even in these darkest hours." Suddenly, the chamber's lights flickered, shadows twisting unnaturally. The shard's influence surged, its corrupt whispers weaving into the minds of all present. Some faltered, clutching their heads in agony. Others whispered prayers to gods long forgotten. Vaughn clenched his fists, fighting against the insidious pull. "Hold fast," he commanded. "The enemy may break our bodies, but they will never claim our souls." Outside, the final battle erupted in a cataclysm of fire and blood. The skies tore open with warp energy, and the very fabric of reality threatened to unravel. In this crucible, alliances would shatter, sacrifices would be made, and the fate of Cadia would be forged in the flames of war. And as the stars themselves wept their final tears, the last stand of Cadia was set ablaze. The air was thick with the scent of burning promethium and ozone as the battle raged across the shattered plains surrounding Casa Merak. Explosions rocked the ground, sending shockwaves that rattled the very foundations of the fortress. The cries of the dying and the clash of war machines melded into a chaotic symphony, echoing the desperate fight for survival. Lord Castellan Garin Vaughan stood amidst the command deck, his armor battered, but his spirit unyielding. Around him, officers and warriors fell, each sacrifice a thread in the tapestry of Cadia's last stand. His eyes burned with a fierce resolve, yet beneath the surface lay the heavy weight of countless losses. Captain Sorelia moved through the battlefield, rallying the scattered remnants of the defenders. Her voice rang clear amidst the chaos. "Hold the line, for Cadia, for the Emperor." But as the fighting intensified, the insidious whispers of the Shard grew louder in Vaughan's mind, weaving dark promises of salvation through destruction. The line between duty and despair blurred as the artifact's corrupting power gnawed at his resolve. In the heart of the fortress, a terrible choice loomed. Vaughan could unleash the Shard's full might, risking the destruction of both friend and foe alike, or trust in the fragile courage of his dwindling forces to endure the onslaught. With a heavy heart, he reached for the Shard, its cold energy thrumming beneath his gauntleted fingers. The room seemed to darken, shadows coalescing around him as the artifact's voice whispered of power beyond reckoning. "I will not let Cadia fall," Vaughan vowed, voice steady despite the tempest within. "If this is to be our reckoning, then I will wield this power for the Emperor." The chamber exploded in a blinding light as the Shard's energy surged, rippling through the warp and real space alike. Outside, the Black Legion's assault faltered, their forces thrown into disarray by a sudden, devastating cataclysm. But such power bore a price. The very walls of Casa Merak cracked and groaned, the fortress trembling on the edge of ruin. The cost of salvation was written in stone and blood. As the light faded, Vaughan fell to his knees, the Shard's dark whispers silenced only by the pounding of his own heart. Around him, the surviving defenders stood in stunned silence. The tide of war momentarily halted, but the battle was far from over. Cadia had survived this day, but the scars carved deep into its soul would endure for eternity. The fortress that had stood for 10,000 years no longer felt alive. Its corridors were stripped bare of banners, its armories echoing and half empty, its walls trembling with every distant detonation. The air was cold, not with winter's touch, but with the chill that comes when hope itself begins to die. Lord Castellan Ursaka Creed moved through the central bastion's great hall, boots striking the cracked marble floor. Once, this space had been the heart of Cadia's command, a place where generals plotted the fate of the Cadian Gate. Now it was a shelter for the wounded, its vaulted ceiling darkened by smoke. Cadian soldiers lay in makeshift cots, their armor dented, their faces pale. Medicae servitors moved silently between them, their metal hands slick with blood. Colonel Kell joined him, his uniform shredded from a dozen close calls. "This is it, sir," he said quietly. "The outer ring is gone. The inner casas have fallen. This bastion is all we have left." Creed said nothing. His eyes scanned the walls where the banners of Cadia still hung, their colours blackened by soot but not yet torn down. They seemed to defy the air of defeat that hung over the fortress. "Enemy movement?" he asked finally. Kel nodded grimly. Multiple spearheads advancing from the west and south. The Blackstone fortress has moved into position directly overhead. It's close enough to see with the naked eye. They climbed to the bastion's highest parapet, and there it was, an impossible shape hanging above the horizon, its vast flanks bristling with weapons, its surface alive with crawling rune-etched machinery. Warp light bled from its seams like the heartbeat of a dying god. Below, the plains of Cadia were no longer plains. The land was a mosaic of burning cities, shattered trench lines, and the black scars of orbital strikes. And moving across it, inexorable as the tide, came the armies of the despoiler. The ground shook beneath their march. Titans strode among them like walking mountains, flanked by tanks daubed in the symbols of the dark gods. Between them swarmed infantry, both mortal traitors and demons that moved like nightmares given flesh. "They'll be here by nightfall," Kel said. Creed looked up at the sky. The eye of terror was no longer a distant wound. It seemed to lean closer, spilling its light down upon Cadia in a steady, sickly glow. It gave the battlefield a strange twilight, a world caught between day and night, between reality and the warp. "They won't wait until nightfall," Creed murmured. "They'll come as soon as the Blackstone's ready to fire." In the command chamber, officers gathered for what everyone knew was the last council of war. Maps meant little now. Every red mark of the enemy's advance was already at their doorstep. There would be no reinforcements, no evacuation. The Imperial fleet was scattered, those ships still intact retreating to regroup far from the system. Greyfax stood in the corner, her armor scarred, her eyes harder than steel. "I can still extract you, Castellan," she said, her voice low but sharp. "The Imperium cannot lose you. The war for the gate will continue, and it needs your mind." Creed met her gaze and shook his head. "Cadia doesn't need a ghost. It needs a commander who stands with his people to the last." She said nothing, but the faintest flicker crossed her face. Whether respect or frustration, he couldn't tell. The final preparations were made. Ammunition was rationed to the last clip. Every able-bodied soldier was armed, from the youngest conscripts to veterans whose armor bore the scars of half a dozen campaigns. Even the wounded, who could still stand, were issued rifles and sent to the walls. When the first horns of chaos sounded across the plain, the fortress trembled, not from the sound itself, but from the answering roar of the enemy. The last bastion was surrounded. From the parapets, Creed watched them come. The ground was a black sea of bodies and war machines, the banners of the traitor legions waving like the teeth of a closing trap. The roar of their approach was a storm, drums, horns, and the blaring metallic cries of demons. "Let them come," Creed said under his breath. "Let them throw everything they have at us. Cadia stands." But in his heart, he knew Cadia would not stand much longer. The walls would fall, the bastion would burn, and the ground itself would shatter. Yet there was still one last stand to make, one final line to hold. As the first enemy shells screamed toward the fortress, the Cadian guns answered in kind. The last bastion had entered its final night. The night over Cadia's last bastion burned like a false dawn. The plains were lit by constant muzzle flash, the sky torn open by streaking missiles and collapsing orbital debris. Each detonation sent a tremor through the stone beneath Lord Castellan Ursarkar Creed's boots, but he did not flinch. He stood on the command balcony, staring out over the killing fields, waiting for the moment he knew would come. It came as a shadow, vast and deliberate, pushing through the smoke and fire. Abaddon the Despoiler, the War Master of Chaos, towering in his black and gold Terminator plate, his talon dripping warp light, as if it had been dipped in the marrow of dying worlds. Around him marched the chosen of the Black Legion, their armor cracked and blackened from countless wars, their banners whispering with demonic voices. The fortress guns thundered, but the enemy formation seemed to move through the shelling like a beast through rain. Shells burst against invisible wards. Last fire was swallowed by the shadows that coiled around them. The closer they came, the more the air itself seemed to bow, as though reality knew its master approached. Kel was at Creed's side, his jaw tight. "He's coming for you," he said, as if speaking the obvious could make it less certain. Creed nodded once. "Then we'll receive him properly." The central hall of the bastion became the stage. The surviving officers withdrew to the galleries, the doors sealed behind the approaching enemy. Creed stood at the far end of the chamber, his cap set aside, his greatcoat hanging open. Before him lay a massive tactical display, its surface littered with markers showing every surviving Cadian unit. When the gates burst inward, it was not with the fury of blind rage, but the precision of inevitability. The chosen fanned out, weapons ready, but Abaddon strode alone toward the war table. "Lord Castellan Creed," the War Master's voice rolled like distant thunder. "Defender of Cadia, the man who has stolen more of my years than any other, I have come to end you." Creed's gaze did not waver. "Then you've come to the wrong place. I don't end. Cadia doesn't end. Even if you burn this world to ash, it will live on in every soldier who fought here, in every enemy you'll face for the rest of your cursed life." Abaddon circled the war table, his gauntleted fingers brushing over the markers. Bold words, from a man who commands nothing but ruins. "I offer you this creed. Kneel. Swear your service to me, and I will remake Cadia in glory. Its sons and daughters will rise again, unbroken, immortal." Creed's lips tightened. "You don't know Cadia. We don't kneel. Not to you. Not to anyone." For a moment, their eyes locked. Two wills, neither yielding. The air between them seemed to tighten, the sounds of battle outside fading into a dull roar. It was not merely a contest of strength, but of conviction. Abaddon leaned over the table, his shadow falling across it. "Then you will watch your last bastion fall, and your people die screaming." Creed's fingers moved across the tactical display, pressing a recessed control rune. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but they'll take a piece of you with them." From the depths of the fortress came the grinding roar of concealed machinery. Charges planted days earlier, buried under the approach routes, threaded into the very bones of the bastion, armed in silent synchrony. Outside, the enemy's front ranks surged forward, only for the ground to erupt beneath them in a chain of thunderous explosions. Whole formations vanished in fountains of earth and fire. Abaddon's talon flexed, claws hissing as they extended. "You think to bury me?" "No," Creed said. "Just to remind you that Cadia never falls quietly." With a roar, the War Master lunged, and the hall became chaos. Kel was there in an instant, intercepting a blow meant for Creed, his power sword sparking against the demon weapon. The chosen clashed with the last of the Kassakin in the galleries, their cries echoing over the din. Creed moved between the tactical table and the stairwell, firing his last pistol with unerring precision. He was no match for Abaddon in raw strength, but this was his fortress, his ground. Every step the War Master took was slowed by collapsing masonry, misfiring lighting, and the sudden eruptions of hidden charges. The duel of wills was not fought with blade alone. It was fought in the space between breaths. Abaddon's fury against Creed's unshakable refusal to yield. The bastions shook under their contest, stone dust raining from the vaulted ceiling, the air thick with the heat of close combat and the stink of burning promethium. Then, the outer wall collapsed. The battle outside surged inward in a tidal wave of screams and bolter fire. Creed gave the signal, an order Kell had known would come, though neither had spoken it aloud. The last defensive line fell back deeper into the fortress, sealing blast doors as they went. The Warmaster's voice followed them down the corridor, a promise etched in iron. Run as you will, Castellan. This world dies tonight, and you with it. Creed did not look back. His mind was already on the next move, the next trap. The duel was not over, not yet. The sky above Terra was a roiling wound, black clouds torn open by the constant scream of orbital fire. From the jagged edges of the heavens, great burning shards of warships fell like dying stars, their hulls breaking apart as they tumbled into the atmosphere. The once proud bastions of the Imperial fleet, those mighty bulwarks forged in the Emperor's golden ambition, now burned in the shadow of treachery. The traitor legions pressed ever closer to the Imperial palace. Siege guns thundered without pause, shaking the earth like the heartbeat of a dying god. Titans, their silhouettes black against the inferno, strode across the shattered plains of Terra, their footfalls flattening the corpses of loyal and heretic alike. It was no longer a war for glory, nor even for victory. It was a slow murder of a world. Amidst this carnage, a conclave was held in the heart of the traitor camp. Beneath the fractured spire of a ruined administratum tower, the warlords of the rebellion gathered, each cloaked in the weight of their sins. The air was thick with ozone and the stink of burning flesh. The ground itself seemed to recoil from the foul company that stood upon it. Horus sat at the head of the table, if such a thing could be said of the crude slab of stone they used. His armor was scored and rent, blackened from countless duels, yet the power that radiated from him had not diminished. His eyes burned with a light that was not his own, the gaze of something older and darker, staring through the Primarch's flesh. To his right stood Fulgrim, resplendent even in ruin. His armor, impossibly pristine, shimmered with unnatural colors, shifting and twisting under the light as though alive. He smiled faintly, though it was a smile without warmth, a predator's amusement. To Horus's left, Perturabo loomed, his expression set in stone, his eyes calculating the endless mathematics of war and destruction. Angron leaned against a broken column, breathing like a beast in heat, his chain axes twitching in his gauntlets as if yearning for blood. Mortarion lingered in the shadows, a miasma of decay rolling off him, his voice a rasp whenever he spoke. Conrad Kurz stood apart from them all, watching, saying nothing, his pale eyes tracing the blood spatter on the floor with morbid interest. They had come not to debate strategy, but to decide the pace of the killing. "Terror bleeds," Horus began, his voice deep, almost calm. "The walls are cracked, the defenders weary, the Emperor's lapdogs are cornered, but the kill must be deliberate." Angron snarled. "Enough of your pacing. We have them on their knees. Let me lead the assault into the palace now. I will drag the Emperor from his throne myself." "You will do nothing without my order," Horus said, the words a growl that made the air grow heavy. "This is not a slaughter without purpose. This is a message to the galaxy, that the age of the Emperor is dead, and that his chosen are ashes." Fulgrim's smile deepened, and his voice was silk over poison. "Horus is right. The breaking of terror is art. It must be savored, drawn out until every defender realizes there is no salvation, only the inevitability of their ruin. Perturabo's voice was iron. Every day we delay, we spend more lives. My siege engines can breach the inner walls within 3 days if given full support. The longer we play with them, the more chance for reinforcements to arrive. Mortarian's rasp was thick with scorn. Reinforcements? From where? Guilliman will not arrive in time. The lion hides in the shadows, and the wolves, their king is gone. No, Perturabo. Let the world choke on its own despair first. For hours they argued, their voices rising and falling like the tides of war. But beneath the words, there was an unspoken truth. Each of them sought their own satisfaction from the fall of terror. For Angron, it was blood. For Fulgrim, the ecstasy of the kill. For Perturabo, the perfection of destruction. And for Horus, it was the breaking of the man who had once been his father. At last, Horus stood, and all fell silent. "We will wait," he said. "Not long, just enough to strip the palace of all hope. The next assault will be final, but it will not come until the defenders themselves pray for the end." Kurz's voice finally broke the quiet, low and sharp as a knife sliding free of its sheath. "Hope is a stubborn thing. You will need more than shells and blood to kill it." Horus met his brother's gaze. "Then I will burn it out of them myself." The conclave ended in silence, each Primarch returning to his legion to prepare. Outside, the fires of the siege burned higher, and the screams of terror rose to meet the stars. Somewhere in the dark, the Emperor still sat upon his throne, waiting for the end that even he could not yet see. The last echoes of battle had long faded, swallowed by the deep, suffocating quiet that now blanketed the ruins of the imperial palace. In the days before the siege, Terra's skies had been a thing of beauty, a vast expanse of gold and blue, punctuated by the slow, proud drift of the Imperium's banners. Now they were ash-grey and swollen, with the smoke of 1,000,000 pyres, casting the world below in a perpetual twilight. The walls of the palace stood scarred but unbroken, though they bore the marks of a war that had pushed reality itself to the brink. Craters pocked the sacred courtyards where once pilgrims had walked in reverence. Shattered marble pillars lay like the bones of dead titans, and the once proud gates of the Lion's Gate stood twisted and blackened by the fire of heretic engines. Those who survived, mortal and post-human alike, moved through the ruins like shadows, speaking in hushed tones if they spoke at all. Even victory felt hollow. They had endured the unendurable, but the cost was etched into every face, every missing brother, every echoing space where laughter and voices once filled the air. The Emperor's body had been carried to the Golden Throne 3 days prior, surrounded by the hushed, grief-stricken retinues of the legions that still remained loyal. None spoke of what had truly transpired in that final confrontation with Horus. None dared. Only a handful knew the truth, and each bore it like a wound that could never close. Robert Guilliman had taken command of the remnants of the Loyalist forces, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed a deep and gnawing weariness. He spoke of rebuilding, of fortifying, of ensuring that the Imperium would never again be so close to the precipice. Yet those who heard him could not shake the sense that something had been irretrievably lost. The Emperor lived, if such a word could be used, but he would never again walk among them, never again speak as he once had. For Rogel Dawn, the palace was a tomb. He patrolled its halls alone, inspecting the damage, touching each scorched wall, as though the act might keep the memory of its former glory alive. His grief was a thing made of stone, silent but immovable. Even his own sons could not reach him. Sanguinius lay entombed beneath the Hall of Heroes, his alabaster form still and serene, as though only sleeping. Those who came to see him left in silence, unable to find words. His sacrifice had saved them all, yet his absence left a wound in the heart of every warrior who had stood upon the walls. Beyond Terra, the galaxy burned on. The traitor legions had scattered, some fleeing into the eye of terror, others retreating to the shadows between the stars. None believed they were gone forever. The war was over, but the long war had begun, and every soul knew it. In the quiet that followed, the people of Terra began to bury their dead. Mass graves were dug in the outer hives. Processions of robed mourners carried relics of the fallen into the cathedrals that still stood. And in the broken streets, children played without understanding the weight of the silence that surrounded them. The Adeptus Custodes stood at the foot of the golden throne, their silent vigil unbroken, their golden armor dulled by soot and ash. They would not leave his side again. It was said by some that the Emperor's presence could still be felt, faint but constant, in the minds of the faithful. A distant warmth, a whisper at the edge of thought. For others, there was only the cold certainty that the galaxy had changed forever, and that the Golden Age had truly ended. In the final hours of the siege, when the sky burned and the earth shook beneath the fury of gods and primarchs, the Imperium had stood as one. Now it stood divided, not in open rebellion, but in spirit. The Emperor's dream lived on, but it was no longer his voice that carried it forward. As night fell over Terra, the first true night since the siege began, the stars shone faintly through the haze, pale reminders of the vast galaxy beyond. And somewhere, deep within the machinery of the Golden Throne, a spark of life still clung to the Emperor's broken form. But outside, in the silent streets of the Palace District, the wind carried no banners, no anthems, only the soft, mournful whisper of a civilization standing at the edge of something it could not yet name. The siege was over. The Imperium had survived. But in the silence after the storm, survival felt like the beginning of a much darker age.